Welcome ladies and gents, my name is Curci and this is the review for Battlefield Hardline. I enjoyed Battlefield Hardline. It is everything a Battlefield game should. Solid first-person shooting mechanics and a good multiplayer experience. It also adds in a nice story. Not an award-winning one, but Hardline can be considered one of those Battlefield games with a good story. You'll spend a portion of the game's single-player campaign as a cop and the other portion as a criminal. Well, sort of a criminal. I won't spoil anything, but I'll have to admit that I was a little disappointed that when playing as a criminal that I didn't get to have that payday-like experience. Basically, you don't rob banks or take hostages. The story takes things in a different direction. I guess an argument could be made that if I wanted a payday-like experience to just play Payday, but it was something I noticed. The story itself was actually pretty good. There was a good arc with good characters thrown into the mix. There are some characters that I felt were pretty bland, but then there were others that had good writing, good voice acting, and I enjoyed when these certain characters were on screen. Hardline's campaign isn't good just because it had a solid story, it also took a much different pace with the gameplay. Previous Battlefield games have had really high action moments, but in Hardline the pace is much slower, as you carefully stealth through an area, quietly eliminating enemies along the way. The best way I found to eliminate enemies is by telling them to freeze, essentially getting the jump on them and forcing them to drop their weapons and surrender, which allowed me to arrest them. You can do this with up to 3 enemies, but you'll also have to move and point your gun at each person to prevent a danger meter from filling up. This is the game's way of making you control the situation and making sure no enemies go for a concealed weapon. This made perfect sense when playing as a cop. You'll flash your badge, tell an enemy to surrender, and cuff him. The thing that I thought was odd was how this mechanic was still present when playing as a criminal. No longer do you flash a badge, you'll just tell an enemy to freeze and point at them. The effect is still the same, however. You'll need to make sure the danger meter doesn't fill up before you cuff them. It just felt a slight bit out of place when I was no longer playing as a cop. As I said before, the game has a focus on stealth gameplay. Most enemies in an area will not be immediately alerted to your presence. On the minimap, you'll see enemies and their line of sight. If you're detected, other enemies in the area will be alerted and a gunfight will break out. This is where Hardline really starts to feel like a Battlefield game as you engage in gunfights that break out in hotels, alleyways, parking lots, and more. It was really nice to see Hardline bring the Battlefield a little bit closer to home. There are some areas that have alarms, and in these areas I got a very Far Cry kind of vibe. I carefully dispatched enemies and disabled the alarm to prevent everyone in the area from being alerted and to make sure that reinforcements didn't come. If you are spotted, you can give enemies the slip. You can hide in an area for a time and eventually the enemies will lose track of you. While this isn't the most ideal situation to be in, it is an option when you are low or out of ammo. Another thing that was added to the game was the ability to scan your environment. You'll scan for additional evidence that can add more details on a specific person or plot point, but you can also scan enemies to tag them. Certain enemies will have an arrest warrant out for them. By scanning, you can discover which enemy has the warrant, and you can either kill or arrest them. I really like this mechanic because it added a little bit of a side objective for me to complete, and I always had to make sure that I got those guys. However, this mechanic was present for the criminal side of the campaign, and once again, felt out of place. The multiplayer side of the game was what you would expect from a Battlefield game. There are large maps, vehicles, and lots of destruction. I did enjoy some of the new Hardline game modes. Sure, you can play Team Deathmatch in my favorite Battlefield game mode, Conquest, but you also have heists where criminals attempt to steal bags of money from a vault and extract it while the police attempt to stop them. There is Blood Money, where both teams try to take money from a pile in the center of the map and deposit it in their respective vaults. And there's Crosshair, where there are no respawns as the cops try to take a VIP to an extraction point while the criminals attempt to kill the VIP. These are just 3 of the 5 Hardline game modes that I actually enjoyed a lot. But other than that, there really isn't much to say in the way of Hardline's multiplayer. Aside from the good new game modes, it's Battlefield, and fans of Battlefield games will be happy with what's there. In the end, I did enjoy the campaign. It had a good story with some good characters and had a different pace than previous Battlefield games. But there were some bland characters, and I think the developers really missed an opportunity with the criminal side of the story. I also felt the arresting and scanning mechanics were good, but they felt out of place when being used by a criminal. There was also more than one occasion where I saw enemies clip through walls. While the multiplayer gameplay is good and has good new game modes, there isn't much more I can say about it. It's Battlefield and you'll get what you expect out of it. This game might not have that wow factor about it, but it delivers where it should for a Battlefield game, and I can't fault it for that. Battlefield Hardline is a good game, and I enjoyed it, but it isn't a must-own game. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.